Hey everyone, and welcome back to Another Pass at Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, on these trips down memory lane, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi!
Sam, so we have come to one of those movies that I've been sort of wondering how you would respond, because back in the day, I was way more open to just saying, like, yeah, we can talk about anything, right? Like, you can polish even, like, the shiniest of diamonds as the premise for the show. And so I was really willing to engage with movies that I think are pretty good and were commercially successful and critically acclaimed. So today we're talking about Captain America: Civil War.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Before we get into the flashback to that episode, because again, this is Another Pass at Another Pass, where we look back at the first 100 episodes of the show before Sam came on as a co-host and get her opinion, but at the same time also kind of go into the history of the show a little bit. Because, yeah. our navels, we love to gaze at them.
How glorious they are.
Yes. So yeah, this is with Tom Obrzut, who this I think is his only time on the show. He is a friend of mine and a D&D player that I at the time was his dungeon master, but he's probably been my dungeon master more often at this point. Really, really clever guy, but also not like a content creator type person. So I'm really excited to have him on this one because I think he's rather smart, even though he's coming from a very different standpoint than I am with the MCU in general.
Yeah, I think it makes it interesting too because listeners, you'll see that he is not a big comic book person, so it's nice to get that perspective. I think of a film, when you don't have all the background information. It's very helpful.
Yeah, like the layman's perspective in this one. And like there's a big chunk of our dynamic because he's one of my friends. And thus this is the dynamic we all have, which is that friend asked me for comic book insight, not knowing what they were about to
oh boy,
begat upon themselves.
It all started in...
Exactly. That is the relationship I have with all of my friends. You all know this. This is the show. This is especially Men of Steel. But so it's a lot of me explaining like background stuff from the comics and us having like I'd say a pretty good conversation about the movie. It feels it feels like we are a little bit less tight on the format, and that is because we recorded this in chunks. While people were coming in and out, like his wife is making dinner in the background at one point. Like you can hear like people come in and like grab a soda or a beer. I can't remember which, but probably a beer now that I say that out loud. It was like weirdly like we would do 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, and like that all came together over this like weird Saturday of hanging out / podcasting. And unfortunately, I think you can tell from the audio. I had gotten to be a better editor by this point, so I was particularly good at isolating out background noise when I didn't have to have it. But this was back when I was using that Tascam where there was something wrong with one of my mics, and I was always so goddamn dumb that I just never tested it outside of recording it. Like, I just didn't think to, like, be like, oh, I should just, like, record myself using each of the mics in isolation and figure out which one's the crappy one and then replace it.
Right.
But I just didn't, and I just kind of lived with it. And so my audio is much clearer than his, and, like, I don't know if it's because it's an Omni and it's picking up, like, all this room tone or something, like, or it's just not picking up that much, and thus, like, maybe, like, it's one track or something. I don't know exactly. Either way, yeah, I'm sorry, listeners. This is going to have like a little bit of roughness to me, at least. Like I'm hearing it. It's probably not going to be that bad, and I'm going to try to clean it up on the final edit.
And it is better than some of the episodes we've already listened to, audio wise. So, like, in my opinion, some of the earlier ones were more.
Oh, definitely the stuff with the Tascam in general. Like, might as well have been me doing like remote interviews as opposed to like having like any kind of like proper recording setup. It just what could have been better. But that's what we're looking at on this show. We're seeing how the show grows. With that, why don't we actually get into the episode?
For sure.
And go.
Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to Another Pass podcast. I'm Kay Sagan, and today we are talking about Captain America Civil War. I am joined by my friend Tom Obrzut. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
No. You Polish names. Every guy who has a Polish name has always been like, no, that's close enough, but you're totally wrong.
So it would help if you practice, but my wife still can't say it right, so I guess we forgive you.
Nah, fair enough. So Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Tom. I'm here to make my very, very first podcast about Captain America Civil War. And I'll start by saying that even though I've enjoyed every single Avenger, Iron Man, Batman, Superman, etc. movie, cartoon that I could get my hands on, I have not read a single comic book in my life. So I'm not providing that.
Well, no, that's fair enough. I think the problem sometimes with these movies is that the fans will go in and know too much. I think there's a couple characters in particular in this movie that rely a lot on the fans knowing who they are and what the broader implications are. So I walked away from the movie when I first saw it really liking it.
Which is interesting because I, having watched all the back movies before, came out with the exact opposite perspective. I actually really did not like it the very first time I saw it. And it was only the second time, because we have just finished watching it, that I feel like on my second viewing, I liked it a lot more than on my first viewing.
Gotcha. All right. So yeah, let's get into it. So pros and cons of the movie. I've actually done a whole podcast over at Certain Point of View talking about things I loved about the movie. We did a late night reaction right after watching it. Let's give it to you. What are your thoughts?
When you first watch it, it's very, very, very hard to follow. It really is. Even I have seen, like I said, all the background movies. I had a hard time actually following certain plot twists, and I had a hard time keeping track of all the copious characters.
There are a lot of characters in this movie.
There's a lot of characters in this movie. And I don't feel like you need to make a backstory on Tony Stark, obviously. You don't have to make a backstory about Captain America. But when you throw in 17 other characters, somebody who doesn't have necessarily perspective is going to get lost really, really quickly.
Yeah, I could see that. The comparison I was making a lot was to the first Avengers movie and the second Avengers movie. The first Avengers movie did a really good job of introducing all those characters if you had never seen any Marvel movie before, or if you'd only seen one. Like if you'd only seen the Iron Man movies, they did a pretty good job of setting up every other major character in that movie. But then you get to Avengers 2, and they just sort of start with a team together, and they do character establishing bits, but then the movie is just a go. We've established that they're who they are really quickly. We introduce some new characters, but the characters that we have are the team, and it's expected that you know who they are. And this movie kind of goes the same way.
But I would argue that the difference is that in Avengers 2 between Avengers 1, having seen both of them, you didn't start off with a completely new team. You had your team from Avengers 1. It sort of continued onwards to Avengers 2 with a few modifications here and there, and you introduce some new villains and a new plot.
But when you go here, you start the movie with the team that they have at the end of Avengers 2.
Yes, you do. But then all of a sudden, everything starts shifting, where all of a sudden you introduce a host of new characters. You introduce almost no backstory to any of them. And you're kind of left, I think it's very, very telling that I didn't really start understanding this movie until after the first time I saw it. You actually explained to me the backstory on several of the characters.
The one in particular, which people who are not familiar with the comics will have the hardest time with, is the Black Panther.
Yes.
And that definitely comes into some of my notes on how this movie could have been stronger.
Well, so I think this is a good plug into getting into that. So let's start with the very beginning of the movie. I honestly thought that the beginning of the movie, that first scene, is a very, very nice bridge between Winter Soldier and the current Avengers movie. Because you have we've got Rumlow, who is Crossbones. He was
he was hinted, or he was a reference to a supervillain from Marvel Comics in Winter Soldier, and in this movie, he full on has become that supervillain character.
Yes.
I dug his look. I thought he had a very nice, fully supervillain kind of aesthetic to him. Like in the comic, he just wears like a black tank top with like the crossbone symbol and like a luchador mask with like a skull face. But the look that they gave him in this, I thought worked really well. They gave us a compelling reason for him to be a threat physically to Captain America, even though this Captain America can just kick a car and knock people on the other side of it over, or like fling people across buildings.
Absolutely. And I thought the action was well shot. I thought actually even the angles of the way they shot it was very compelling. And I mean, let's face it, when you go to see one of these Avengers action flicks, you're looking to see some good action.
And they do cool stuff with it. Like they use Scarlet Witch in a cool way to like bring the gas out of the building. They're like, oh, this is why we have these superpowered beings that are less conventional. Like why? Like what is their use in a fight? You know, beyond just being like, all right, well, I'm going to knock out the bad guy. Like, oh, it's like, okay, I can suck this stuff out. I can prevent casualties this way. I can do, you know, all these like support things. And she's also pretty terrifying on top of that. But
yes, and I even like the way that she blocked that explosion from Captain America, which would have killed him, and instead tried to redirect it, but didn't do it in the right way, and so took out part of the building, which created casualties that she felt upset about.
Yeah, I always felt that the damage from that explosion should have been more severe. It felt like if it had gone off on the first floor, all those people in the market would have died. And by going up, it probably only killed like a handful of people relative to the amount that would have been on the first floor. And I really wish it had like caused the building to collapse or something like that, where it's like much worse.
I was expecting a little bit more. I was expecting like a partial building collapse, or even better still, had she just redirected it. I mean, it was nice that the building caught on fire, but had she just lost control of it, maybe? Like, yeah. Redirected it from Captain America so he survives, but half the market dies in a magnificent explosion. That actually might have been...
Yeah, what if it was like a funnel or like a you know, like with a flashlight with like a reflector.
Yeah.
So it burst through one direction, and as a result, all of it went to one thing and was much more destructive in that one direction than it would have been otherwise.
And I think that would have been, and if anything, you know, she would have felt more guilty because she had redirected the explosion away that killed innocent civilians.
Yeah.
More directly, as opposed to cause structural damage to a building. But you never actually see anybody dying in that explosion. You see a building that's caught.
Yeah, and that was part of the problem. Later, when they go through the footage of different incidents with Avengers that were big public, you know, escapades, they show like New York, and then they show DC, and they show Sokovia, and they're these huge set pieces, and they do a really good job of moving the camera angle from being the hero's angle that we saw in those movies to being like men on the streets. And that was really cool because like the trailers didn't do that. They showed footage from the actual movies, and this is like, oh, it's a person looking up at the Hulk, dropping like debris and like killing that person, and presumably. But then they cut to this incident in Nigeria, and it's like a fire. It's just not as like compelling a reason as anything that has come before at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Avengers Age of Ultron and you see how much just raw destruction, like lifting up the better part of the city into the air and then free falling it with countless casualties. You know, her brother died, but she didn't get upset. And now, because she caused, a tenth of a building to catch on fire, all of a sudden she's really, really upset.
Yeah.
It is a little bit suspect.
I feel like we're missing some sort of play there.
Yes. But nonetheless, I mean, I'll give the opening sequence good marks because I thought the overall action, which is why we're seeing the movie, was very, very good. And I'll cut to the first introduction of Zemo, the villain. And I have to say, another good point about this movie, I thought that opening sequence where he cons his way into that other Russian agent's door.
Yeah, that was a nice touch. Like him, jumping the curb to hit it to give a convincing reason.
Yeah.
To like have the guy let his guard down. That was pretty good.
He's like, no, I don't want any cops. I'll let you in. And then just knocks him out and then ties him up upside down to a water sink and starts pouring out the water faucet. I mean, that's like what? Waterboarding 2.0?
Yeah, it was a very good introduction for the character. I'm a little torn about his ultimate portrayal because I love Baron Zemo in the comics. I think he's one of the best conflicted villains or in some lights, a hero that Marvel has put out in a long time. Like the backstory for people who aren't aware, there have been two Baron Zemos. The father was a Nazi in the 40s who was a villain of Captain America's and started like the Masters of Evil in the 60s and was like a very classic Red Skull when you don't have Red Skull, like the dime store Red Skull. And then they had his son come back after he was killed for a while. And at first he was a straightforward villain, not that successful even. And he had one really awesome mission where he got together a group of supervillains that was about 3 times larger than the Avengers. They stormed Avengers Mansion. They beat up their butler. They put Hercules in a coma. They knocked out Captain America. And when he came to, he was chained up. And Baron Zemo had taken all of Captain America's personal effects and slowly, piece by piece, destroyed them, including the last photo that Captain America had of his mother. And then he just sort of kept on popping up in comics after that. Did a really cool story where he like pretended to be a superhero with a bunch of other supervillains and then were revealed to be not as such, but it was a really well-written story because at first we actually thought it was just a new team of superheroes. And then eventually he got superpowers and became enlightened and realized that there were better ways to do things. And then he hasn't really been seen for a while because it got lost in time. But for a stretch, he actually went through and like he was fixing these huge metaphysical problems because he was in like the higher than Superman power set group where like, and upon becoming that powerful, he was like, oh shit, I had really screwed up. I could have done way better with my brains.
We have an editing process, right? We can edit all that out.
Yes. I don't know if we will. No, but I love the character. And I love that. Now, I was conflicted because this is not the character we get in the movie.
And this is, again, brings me back to, you know, I haven't read any of those comics. I was not familiar with any of that scene. And I actually like the introduction of this character. I take him for what he is in the movie, not what he's supposed to be in the comics. And that, I think, is the difficulty with these movies. You're either going at it as, I want to stay true to all the canon of the comics, or I want to create a movie for your average guy who maybe has seen some, maybe not even all of these.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I'm saying I'm a little conflicted because I thought this was fine, but he wasn't as grandiose as he could be. Like, I don't need fidelity. I need, if you're going to deviate in a big way, I would like it to be relevant to the story or really good. And I thought the background for him was really good. I just think that I have a lot of questions about his plan.
Okay.
And I would have liked to see a little bit more of that. I don't feel that he was as active an agent as he could have been.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel that,
and I think I can get more into my notes on that, but he's a good character in this, but he could have been great. He could have been great. And there's a little bit of the Dark Knight Joker syndrome where it's like, this was all part of my master plan, but we don't see how that makes sense.
That is true. That is true. But nonetheless, we've got the good introduction.
So here's the thing that I thought was weird.
Okay.
They don't talk about Hydra at all. Like, they mention it for the Winter Soldier stuff.
Yes.
But they don't talk about how Hydra had infiltrated and taken over S.H.I.E.L.D. and presumably a good chunk of the United States and possibly other governments.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they went from, if you look at Winter Soldier, where essentially the little floating aircraft carriers crash into DC, which they cut to as one of their justifications.
Yeah, they reference it a lot, but they don't actually talk about Hydra taking over everything.
Right. So you got to keep in mind it's a movie. They can't address everything, but it's sort of, they're using this as a justification for why they're making this big UN scene to rein in the Avengers. Whereas on the other side, they're also praising the Avengers for saving us from Hydra, but they don't really ever fully reconcile.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually one of my big questions, which is that I feel like the events of Winter Soldier are the exact reason why the Accords don't make sense in this universe.
Yes.
Like the concept that, we're gonna be okay with our governments running all our superhumans is exactly where they were to begin with. Because at the beginning of Winter Soldier, Cap was just an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.
That's right.
And just going off and doing missions. And then he finds out that, oh no, he's actually been working for secret Nazis.
Yes. And in fact, we're going to have this government oversight, which is going to enforce some sort of world order on everything from these aircraft carrier gunships that are now floating around the world. But then that ends up being an agent of Hydra. a ploy of them to take over the world. But now that we've taken that down, all these ships crash, we have a scene where the Avengers are doing their thing, but no, that's not good. Now we have to put them again in a box.
Yeah, they make passing references, but it seems like, wait, hold on. We know very clearly that regimes change. They talk about that as a possibility, but we have a very concrete example. And it's really weird that we don't talk about the impact that Hydra had on like government control over these like metahuman assets.
Right. And Samuel L. Jackson, I mean, they brought in every other actor they could find from any movie remotely related to Marvel, but they don't bring in Samuel L. Jackson's character. Pure.
Right. Well,
the only one that doesn't appear in any of this.
Yeah, he had no part of this little conversation.
Which you would think that, which is another criticism, if you're taking the Avengers and you're trying to put them into a box, would you not think that he would have something to say about that?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think if this movie had come before Winter Soldier, that would actually be a really logical setup if Captain America was cool with it. Like if he was the one who was like pro like Accords, signs up for it, and then at the end of the movie he's working for the government, and then we find out that Hydra's controlling everything.
Yes,
because like Gary Shandling's character in Iron Man and then in Winter Soldier, I forget the senator's name, but he's the one in Iron Man 2 who's trying to like have Tony Stark come and like have the Iron Man armor just work for the government,
right?
Which is exactly the scenario, and then we find out that he's actually a Hydra agent. And so the implication of Winter Soldier was that, Hydra was just trying to make it so the U.S. government had complete control over all these superpowered assets. And then this movie is Iron Man being like, no, we should let the government have complete control.
Which it feels like the complete opposite of his character in general.
I mean, I could see it as being like a sign of growth, but there is generally at least what I've seen, a fan sentiment that the motivation that he had in Iron Man 3 and then in Avengers 2 is the justification for him in this movie. That he saw that Earth is so vulnerable to like outer space threats, and that he doesn't want the Avengers to be split up because that is the natural defense from those outer space threats that are coming. But he never says it.
Exactly. Isn't that reading between the lines? Isn't that something that you're actually inferring based on your perception of watching all these movies, reading all these comic books, whereas the movie never actually addresses where he actually comes from? So another one of my criticism was, all of a sudden you go from a very big action scene, then you go into a somewhat sappy recreation of one of Tony Stark's initial traumatic memories, which I get sets up the backstory.
See, I like that scene.
I thought they could have maybe looked at the dialogue a little bit more, but anyways, that's fine. I'm okay with it. I can live with it. But then you go from that scene into Tony Stark all of a sudden being this big proponent of this plan to box, sort of the Avengers into signing this accord. And I feel like he was sort of, even just not even reading the comic books, just watching the movies, you see this guy who's always been rogue, anti-government, his entire movie canon moving into, we should sign this accord. We got to sign this accord.
Yeah, it does seem like a weird shift.
Yeah. But, he does do it. He makes the shift. He starts trying to get all the Avengers into his little signing the accord, create unity for whatever reason.
Yeah, and he teams up with Secretary Ross. And I liked that they brought back William Hurt as Thunderbolt Ross. Like, he was the general who was chasing after the Incredible Hulk in the Ed Norton Incredible Hulk movie. Yeah, no, so he's a recurring character. At the time, he was just a general. That's why they reference him having Medal of Honor. He's a major character in Marvel Comics, or at least in the Hulk mythos. So him being the face of this, that was nice continuity, like tying the universe together.
Yet another one of those plot points that actually went over my head because I missed that part.
But weird point, what a waste of Martin Freeman to come in and basically play like the same type of character, but like an underling version of him, but with the same last name. So they kept on being like Secretary Ross, Everett Ross, Secretary Ross, Everett Ross. Like all of the scenes that Martin Freeman was in could have just been William Hurt playing Secretary Ross with maybe like a few changes in like the power dynamic, but not like major shifts in the scene.
Well, but would you have actually made any changes? So far, we've gone through the initial action scene, which we both liked, with maybe a few minor tweak edits, maybe blow up the entire building otherwise. We cut scene to a recreation of Tony Stark's initial memory of his parents dying in order to grant money to a lot of MIT think tank.
Yeah, well, I like that because we see Tony Stark being more than just a hero. Or rather, being a hero for the real world. Like he's not just Iron Man. He's Tony Stark who can be behind a lot of like cool technology and then like fund research and like push forward big ideas to change the world. Like that's the broader Tony Stark,
which I thought was actually a fine use of his character and such. Then we cut to where he meets with all the Avengers after their mishap, shall we say, in Africa, in some, was it
Nigeria, I think is what they said, but yeah,
Nigeria, where they create a lot of havoc and kill a supervillain. And at that point, Tony Stark is trying to get them to sign the Accords to limit themselves. Would you have changed anything up to this point?
Yes. I mean, I would have actually had more information about the Accords, and I would have had Tony Stark be a player in it. We have this scene that echoes the comics where like a woman comes up and is like, "You killed my son."
Yes,
that's right, and that's showing him having this this face-to-face confrontation with the repercussions of his actions. I would have liked if that was the jumping off point for him to have that conversation with Secretary Ross, with T'Chaka, with all the different nations who are talking about the Sokovia Accords, and have him be sort of the face of the Avengers, because he's the guy who pays for everything and, makes everything run.
Yes.
Where he's negotiating the whole thing so that when he shows up with the Secretary of State, we understand why he's there and that he had a part of it.
So it's too much of a leap for you to go from one little scene where, somebody takes him after a little presentation that he makes to MIT students and say, "You killed my son in the last Age of Ultron movie. You are to blame, and you get to go home, and I live with my grief." It's too much of a leap to go from that to putting the Avengers in a box.
I don't think it's too much of a leap, but I think that it is one where I would have appreciated, even if it wasn't him fully forming the Accords, but having that conversation with Ross or with someone. Setting up a little bit of the dialogue before it's brought forth to everyone else, because you see that moment, and then Ross shows up. The fact that they came together is part of it. Like if he had just been there, dealing with his own like mental thoughts of like, well, I'm responsible for this kid dying, and then like Ross comes forward and like, well, a lot of people died. Here's the thing that we have to do, and then he agreed with him. I think that would have been also a viable scene. The fact that they came together makes me feel that he was already briefed on everything. And I would have liked to see either him being briefed on it and his feedback separately, or him participating in the initial conversations about it. If he felt like more of a hand in forming those Accords, then it's not just him being like the public speaker trying to keep everything together, but him actually being an active participant, which right now he's not enough of one in that element of this plot.
Well, do you feel that actually brings up the issue of, the title of the movie is, Captain America Civil War, right?
Yes.
It's not the Avengers Civil War.
Right. It's definitely focused around Captain America.
So do you think that, I agree with your criticism that taking, if they do the cutscene where Tony Stark has his MIT moment, meets the woman, has a change of heart, realizes there's consequences to his actions, therefore wants to put a box on the Avengers. You're arguing put a middle scene where he actually has an input on the UN.
Yes, because ultimately he plays the role of the antagonist.
Sure, but does that make it more of now, instead of calling the title Captain America Civil War, does that mean now we should call it the Avengers Civil War?
No, because the Captain America is our viewpoint character for this.
Yes.
The fact that we're coming with him after the Winter Soldier and the Hydra thing, and a lot of the drama has nothing to do with the Accords, but rather stuff to do with Bucky.
Yes.
It's Captain America's movie. But Iron Man is the antagonist. The ultimate fight is between Iron Man and Captain America. They're not antagonists like he's the bad guy and Cap's the good guy, but they are the direct rivals in the storytelling. And that their goals and their missions are the things that are directly at odds. Zemo is a manipulator at large. Thunderbolt Ross is a pest. But it is the relationship between Cap and Iron Man that is ultimately the thing at play. Everyone else sort of sides with one or the other, but those are the two beacons of the Avengers. So setting up your antagonist with developing scenes is not deriving interest, or pardon me, it is not taking the movie from being a Captain America movie to being the Avengers. It is just being Captain America, but this movie is about Captain America versus Iron Man.
That is true, but at the same time, I almost feel like you need to come to a decision, because one of my biggest criticisms with this movie was it tried to be a little bit of everything. You tried to bring in Captain America. You tried to bring in Tony Stark. You tried to bring in, heck, every other superhero that you could think of, with the exception of maybe the Incredible Hulk.
Hulk and Thor.
Those are the only two missing.
Yeah.
We'll get into it, but we've even brought in like 10 other people that we've never even seen before.
Well, they were all in Avengers too.
Sure. But, you almost have to, when you have a cast this big, you almost have to decide what direction are you going in. And I feel like one of my biggest criticisms of this movie is they tried to do it all at the same time. So think about it this way. Let's say you recast this as truly Captain America, only his perspective. So you don't cut scene to where Tony Stark has his MIT mode, because you're not interested in his part of the plot on it.
Then you would feel much more betrayed by every choice that he makes in this movie.
Which one?
By every choice that Tony Stark does. Because he's a very established character. Like, if it wasn't Iron Man, who has had his own movie series, maybe you could make an argument for it. But at that point, we're just talking about Thunderbolt Ross and his cronies, not its own hero who you are at odds with.
Maybe, but at the same time, when a group of characters have grown so big that to actually cover all their perspectives, you're cutting and cutting and cutting, people who are not familiar with the intricacies get lost in the play.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what happened in this movie. It took me 2 times to understand what was going on.
Right. No, I get that. I mean, the interesting thing with the Marvel movies is you have this big sprawling world where you can set up a lot of characters in a lot of movies and have them show up in each other and with minimal exposition. It is difficult to imagine any other series doing that airport fight where you get all these characters who have differing opinions and different motivations face to face with each other. Now, that said, some of those are just parts of this larger pantheon. Like, we don't get Thor and Hulk, which would have probably changed some of that dynamic. Like, how they relate to each other would have been better set up. Like, we know a little bit about how Vision and Scarlet Witch relate to each other, but not nearly to the degree that we see some of the other characters. We know a little bit about how Hawkeye relates, and he's been in a lot of movies at this point, but he hasn't been the front runner for any of them. And most of the people he's facing aren't people he really knows. We get when they square off, for example, like Black Panther fights Winter Soldier, and like that made sense. Like, of course he's going to go for that one. And Falcon is going to get up there and is going to try to deal with one of the other flyers. And that made sense from a tactical standpoint. Actually, it's funny to note that like Iron Man and Captain America both have their black military best friend. And they both come from like the different perspectives, where Iron Man has a colonel who technically outranks Captain America. He's brass. Like he's like higher up on the military. He's not like the top pecking order, but he's up there. And Iron Man is a military contractor. He's already up there too. Captain America's out in the field, and his buddy is someone who is a pilot, not literally a pilot, but someone who run like air missions and stuff like that. Like they're soldiers that are out versus the people who are like actually like manipulating and controlling the field. I don't mean like
it's a very interesting philosophical fight from that standpoint. But what I was actually, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but if we're gonna go to that fight, let's go to that fight. It made me wonder because it was a great action sequence. Sort of Vision doesn't even play a part in that fight until the second half.
No, he really doesn't want to.
Yeah. Does he stay on the sidelines, just like watching, or is he truly involved in this?
Yeah, it's curious. I mean, Vision is so powerful that he, so I had made this joke before on CPOV that throughout that fight, Scarlet Witch kind of just shows up and saves everyone's asses, like, periodically. It's like, oh, I'm about to get punched. Oh, Scarlet Witch saved me. Oh, a building's about to fall on me. Scarlet Witch saves me. And Vision could have been that on the other side. Like, they're the two most powerful players in this fight. Yeah.
And close. I mean, he's got, what is it, that energy crystal?
He has one of the Infinity Stones. Like, he has one of the things that... He has the stone that is the MacGuffin of the first two Avengers movies. And that they're making a whole movie about having the 5 of them and that being enough to control the world.
Yes. And he's got one of them.
Yeah.
But he's sort of just sitting on the sideline. And the only time he really takes action, what does he do? He paralyzes one.
Yeah.
Because he misses.
Yeah. It was a good fight. Like, the action scenes were great.
Yeah.
I love Spider-Man in that fight.
No.
I thought Spider-Man made no sense being there, but the actual use of him in it was great.
The fights themselves, I actually thought, and again, you go to see these movies for the action sequences. The action sequences were really, really good. And the special effects, they spent their money very, very well. And personally, I hated the introduction of Ant-Man into this movie, but the way they actually used him was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, and he also had his own movie. Like, the thing was, that would make this more of an Avengers movie where a guy from a movie who has never interacted with the others shows up to be an active participant. Like, sure, up until this point, everyone else, aside from Black Panther, who has not had his own movie yet, has been established in the other Avenger movies. If you had seen Avengers 2, theoretically, you know who everyone is.
Right.
Except for Ant-Man. Ant-Man just kind of shows up. I thought it was used well. I noticed a detail. So when they're at the raft, he, like, calls out how Hank Pym said, like, never trust a Stark. And that scene I caught before. But I noticed earlier, before the fight happens, it's like, Stark's here, and he's like, Stark, and then they move on to the next scene. But I was like, oh, I actually forgot about that part, or didn't notice that he reacted even before the fight, that he had been told and warned countless times that Starks are not to be trusted. So he was going into that fight with that knowledge. It wasn't just after the fight, I'm going to taunt this guy.
So I actually, again, I didn't see it. I missed Ant-Man.
How dare you?
Yes, I know. Yeah. I think it's on, what was it, like 99 Cents a Giant?
Anyhow, it's pretty good. It's not the best Marvel movie ever, but it's pretty good. It's worth checking out for fun. It is a big city-destroying fight, but it's actually all like a little Lego playset. Yeah, it's actually really funny for that reason.
Here's the podcast, so we can cue that one up next. But in any case, what brings me to is that one of my big pet peeves of this movie, and the thing that made me really upset is, like, I'm all right with the way that movies are changing these days, is that you place products into the movie. Like, for example, in this movie, I thought that they did it very subtly and well, except for the end scene, is the Audi car placement in almost every single car chase scene. I mean, that's just the way it's going these days. You want to make commercials without seeming like they're commercials, so you place products.
It's like The Truman Show.
Yeah, except now we're living it. But I'm all right with that. But there's a subtlety to, all right, so I'm plugging Audi so the cars are all Audi. I mean, that's been going on for a while, and now it's just more prominent than it was before. You know, Rolex watches, whatever you want to case it. But there's something to be said about, we found a little golden goose, which is these superhero movies have tapped into something in the public at large where everybody wants to see them. Every one of them, with few exceptions, have made a lot of money.
Yeah, and now because they're all so interconnected, it means you really can't miss them, or else you feel like you missed something big. Like, who is the Sandman guy? What does he do? Why is it Paul Rudd? That's a weird choice for a superhero.
Right. And so now all of a sudden, you know, you're in the middle of a movie where there's a division between your superhero team, and both sides look at each other at the same time, decide, wait, we need more people. Let's pick up another superhero randomly.
Yeah, or another couple.
So now let's take, who is apparently in Europe, and he's got 36 hours to rein in Captain America. So what does he do? The right move, is to go to Bronx and pick up what?
Queens. He flies to Queens. Yeah, no, he picks up Spider-Man, and it's dumb. I don't understand. The geography in general is a lot of weird choices in this movie. Like, there are things that are happening simultaneously, and then all of a sudden people go from one country to being there, and it's not a big deal. Like, when that UN bombing happens, they leave from London. They get there. They're still putting out the fire, and it's like the bombing just happened. And, like, Captain America's all of a sudden there. With, like...
Entire team.
Yeah. When they... After that fight... or the big airport fight, they're all taken to prison and like set up in prison. Iron Man shows up, and like all these big trips that they do that should take hours seem to take minutes. It's like if you're just driving around the same city.
Well, the biggest temporal argument that I would make is in the big scene where it's Civil War, where they're all fighting each other. Finally, at the very end, Black Widow lets them get away in the plane. Somehow, Tony Stark has the time to take a conventional helicopter, some secret prison fortress, which I can only assume is North Atlantic, but who knows? Maybe it's Arctic, Antarctica.
Maybe it's like the Black Sea. Maybe that's actually on the way.
Let's hope so. Because he's taking a conventional helicopter to some sort of secret ice prison where they've already processed the prisoners and gotten them into cells and restrained them, interrogates them, manages to get into his suit, and somehow makes it to northern Russia in a Iron Man suit that couldn't catch up with the plane in the first place when it was getting away from.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
That's an error.
It's a little weird. Yeah, well, I think that's my biggest grievance, like the travel time for everything and just the circumstances for how they can be everywhere at once just never made sense to me. Like, they want to do this global story, but it seems to be really more set around, like, if this was written around being in Manhattan.
Yes.
Like if this was a classic Marvel Comics superhero story, and they wanted it to be like New York region, and then they were like, we should make it international. That makes more sense. And so all the travel time is like, oh, well, I guess if we take the tunnel, it'll only take 30 minutes. And it's like, well, I guess if we fly to space and down, it'll only take 30 minutes.
There is, I mean, you sort of give a little bit of leeway, but at the same time, it's just a sloppy error to have Captain America Winter Soldier arrive when Captain America is done interrogating the prisoners, finding out their location, getting into his suit, flying away, and somehow arrives 30 seconds after they arrive. I mean,
yeah, no, I agree. So here's my question for you.
All right.
So how would you fix it?
So it's very simple. Instead of making the UN bombing in Europe, you just make it in the UN building in New York City.
Yeah.
Heck, you're already there then. It makes sense that Spider-Man would even be there.
Yeah, then the airport fight is like Kennedy. Or LaGuardia. Like, yeah.
And that's a simple, easy fix that's really doesn't change anything. I mean, I don't know how much the European audience really gave them, to make it set in Germany with some German accents. He could have easily had the Russian agent, on Long Island.
Yeah. And then the secret Hydra base could just be up in like Binghamton.
He chose that at random. That's right. All
right. I'll tell you a few things that I would do.
All
right. So my two biggest issues with this movie are Wakanda and Zemo in terms of their explanation and for the role they play in this movie. So the two big tweaks I would make is I would make Wakanda way more bellicose. Okay. Like, when their citizens are killed, I would make T'Chaka, instead of like this like super compassionate, diplomatic, like wise king, I would make him actually kind of aggressive. And I would set up that everyone has to listen to Wakanda because they are so scientifically advanced. Like, the idea in the comic book is that this is the most advanced nation on the planet, that they have weapons and resources that no other nation has. And they're super territorial and isolationist. And this is why, like, they haven't really influenced the rest of the world. But if you ever tried to go to war with them, they would wipe you off the map in a second. And if they were trying to like remove that policy, and then their citizens got killed, and then they're like, "Oh, hold on, you're superhumans. Shut this shit down. We are done with this. Hold on, you guys are going to listen to us right now because I am the king of Wakanda, and I actually make the rules here." And if the U.S. government was like, "Okay, we understand," and every other government was like, "Okay, we understand. Yeah, all right, Captain America, you're not allowed to do this anymore." That creates a much more a dynamic introduction for the nation. It was referenced in Avengers 2 They go to like the outskirts of it in Avengers 2, but we don't really see much of it.
Yeah.
And if we set them up as that, and maybe have T'Challa, the Black Panther, be a little bit more compassionate, and have him talk to his father, being like, we don't need to be so aggressive. Like, these people are smart, and they're just trying to do what's best. They don't know, like what some of the dangers of their powers are. Then you can set him up as actually being that more compassionate voice in contrast. And then his father's death pushes him onto the path of his father in this more like bellicose nature. And then he finds redemption at the end and like returns to his true, like balanced self.
And I can see that. I think that if you take the initial scene where they are in Africa, they create a scene, they destroy building Marketplace, there's a lot of casualties. And you, instead of cutting onwards towards some sort of accord, you actually have a scene in the fake country of
Wakanda.
Yeah, whatever. And you have that scene between father and son where they actually debate this issue. And they come up with, we need to restrict these crazy agents of chaos, also known as the Avengers.
Right.
And then they bring in Tony Stark.
Right. And this is why I feel Tony Stark being at a meeting with T'Chaka would help set up T'Chaka's role. It's not just setting up Tony Stark's role. It sets up, this is the role that the Black Panther and that Wakanda plays in this world.
And you add to that the fact that you have this meeting between father and son, and you show up scenes of an advanced nation. You've got, maybe you start off with a very Serenity scene, very clean Marketplace, move on into them turning their like focus to their war machine, which outstrips anybody else and looks very intimidating. That it sort of creates a scene of a society that not only has a lot of order and values that, but also is powerful.
Yeah.
And people need to listen.
And they could have like genetically enhanced soldiers, which is not quite what they have in the comics, but they could establish like that the serums that they have that are kind of similar to the super soldier serum, like that's where Black Panther gets his abilities. Like they could establish that as being a thing that they have. And that's why Black Panther is so goddamn impressive. Like, if you just sort of establish that this is a like eugenically amazing super race kind of nation, then when Black Panther shows up, you're like, oh, this is not just one of the plebs who are all like super soldiers. This is the crown prince. Like this is he is now the king of this nation. He is someone who has clearly been bred to be the best of the best. And that's why he can just take down the Winter Soldier, who he just saw take down an army.
Which would definitely eliminate one of my criticisms of the movie, is that you see this, you're introduced to this random leader who is, as far as I knew, head of the UN, leading a resolution. You have we'll get into the issues of the bombing if you want to. You get the bombing, and then all of a sudden you see his son saying, oh, I'll take care of this. For me, does that mean you hire some special ops group? What do you do from there?
He says so calls himself, yeah.
With no backstory, clawing his way in, beating up both Winter Soldier and Captain America, which
shouldn't be possible. Like we've seen, that's really difficult.
Not be possible. And yet he does. There's no backstory to that. And there isn't a backstory until the final scene really covers it.
No, they never really explain. They definitely don't explain how he's capable of so much stuff. They mentioned that his armor is vibranium, which at least explains how he's so durable, and gives him a few abilities, but that's it. Like it's not that much. Now, my other thing that I would shift is I would make Zemo's plan a little more on the forefront. It feels like he kind of gets lucky for a few circumstances, and that's it. Like when he's torturing that Hydra guy, he says like, "Oh, I have another plan. It's going to be a lot bloodier." Like, what was his other plan? Like, if the guy had just given him all the information, what was plan A? Like, because we're seeing plan B in this movie. Like, what is that plan A? I would have loved if maybe we introduced the Winter Soldier killed the Starks thing earlier. If the reason why Iron Man and Cap are at such odds and Iron Man is so down to take this guy out is that he found out earlier on that the Winter Soldier is the one who killed his parents. And it's not just like push him into a fight at the end, but that's why he's not like the one who's personally really after the Winter Soldier. Then this is a thing that Zemo does. Like Zemo reveals this detail and that pushes Cap and Iron Man to like go into this rift. But like they have that airport fight with basically no machinations from Zemo aside from, well, let's get Bucky, let's blame Bucky for a bombing, which is a really minor plan.
And I'd like to say that is really a stretch. I mean, here you have Zemo who has access to, at the very least, an EMP device.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, when I set up my UN prison, I won't have a backup generator. I mean, I've got these crazy superheroes in lockdown, but I'm going to rely on the power grid. And then, of course, since we have super suits, we have Iron Man, we have Vision. I mean, surely a little trench coat and a wig is going to make people believe that the Winter Soldier did the bombing. That's
yeah. Like it was basically just like a cutout of his face on a stick that he walked by. It's like, it's the Winter Soldier, it's Bucky Barnes. Like, that's what I'm saying. If he had revealed that information, like if he had found in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files that it was the Winter Soldier who killed Howard Stark, or if he had found just in that one dude's files, no, but like the motivation for Tony Stark to be at such odds with Steve Rogers is not it's not part of Zemo's plan.
No.
And so it doesn't make sense that Zemo's like, oh, I'm pulling the strings. He's not the master manipulator in this scenario. He just happens to be able to push a few things to make it go the best case scenario for him. But even then, how does he know that he's going to be in that position? How does he know that they're going to arrive when they do, or with the people that they do? He never does enough motions to really get the pieces in play that he wants, or that he ultimately needs. It's entirely luck. And it's like I said, that Dark Knight Joker, like, oh, it's all part of my master plan. But with so many more pieces, like Joker at least only had to deal with Batman and a couple cops. Like we're talking about people, like, how does he know that Thor's not going to be there? Like we're talking, like the God of Thunder could just show up and ask Odin, like, did this guy do it? Oh, let me send a Raven. Oh, the Raven came back. He said, no, he actually didn't do it. It's actually someone else. Oh, okay. The gods say no.
Right. It seemed like a little bit of a scramble act. Somebody whose mission it is to divide the Avengers, has spent all this time studying the Avengers and
read through all S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files. There's got to be a lot more useful information in there than just like, oh, this one.
Which, getting to that, you're telling me that the entire plot rests on the fact that the Winter Soldier killed Tony Stark's parents. He was ordered to do so by Hydra / this ex-Soviet Union and Vladimir Putin. And as this happened, somebody at this random location that the Winter Soldier himself chose put up a video camera.
Yeah.
And the only copy is in Zemo's hands.
Like, that's the thing. We don't know what Zemo had before. We don't know what Zemo actually got at this place. Like, how did he know that video file was going to be there? Was it in the S.H.I.E.L.D. files? Was it in the dude's files? Was it in the Hydra stuff? Like, we don't know. And so it doesn't feel like Zemo actually knew what he was using, like what tools he was using to break the Avengers apart.
But there is an easy fix for that, which I think is the point of what we're doing. And that is the Winter Soldier gets ordered to execute Tony Stark's father and mother, but not just told in that beginning scene when they bring him out of hibernation. He's told to execute them at a specific location. That's all you have to do, is you have to say, you will kill so-and-so. And you have to say it. Exactly. But you have to say, you have to bring in that forestory as he has to do this mission at such and such location. Because they want to use that maybe ahead of time. But even then, even if you did that, the issue becomes are these people playing chess and they're 10 moves ahead? Then how do they ever fall as Hydra?
Yeah, it's really weird that we got some of the points that we got. Like, I was okay with the fake out about the other super soldiers. The blue liquid, that was nice. I thought that was an okay MacGuffin to get people into position, but I just don't think that the tools that he had outside of that, like, that was a good, like, bait. But he didn't do anything really with that bait. And he, because let's say he didn't have that video in the movie that we actually watched. Like, if he didn't have that video and Cap and Iron Man just arrest him, well, the Avengers are still kind of fucked. Like, a lot of people just went to jail, Cap is still split, or like Cap presumably is going to be arrested by Ross or go into hiding. Pretty much everything plays out the same way, except he and Iron Man aren't at such odds, and they kind of aren't at the end anyway. Like that letter, it indicates that Cap definitely doesn't hold a grudge against Iron Man, and that Iron Man, it looks like, doesn't hold the same grudge against Cap. So really, that fight didn't do anything.
Yeah, it's true.
The only thing it did was it sort of confirmed that, like, oh, Winter Soldier did some fucked up shit. Cap, you can't necessarily rely on this guy, which we already knew, and like he knew, and Bucky knew. Like that fight doesn't do anything. So if that motivation that he killed my mom, which was a great line and a great point, because this has been driving Stark since the first movie. Like he was this raging alcoholic in part because of his dad's death and his like issues with his parents. And that's been the benefit of this long Marvel project. That should have been the motivation more in the movie and not just in that last fight, because it doesn't do anything once he cools off.
Which makes me think that the movie started off great and then it sort of faded.
Yeah.
You know, I
think the Russo brothers are really good directors. I think the fights work really well. They do some great things in that. Like the Winter Soldier's escape when we first like cut back to him from that SWAT team.
Yeah.
Like that's like a reverse raid that sets up, oh, this is how badass he is. And then we get into the real fight when Black Panther shows up and we're like, oh no, this is the real fight. And Black Panther is so much better. Like we established all these things, like every fight does tell us something about the people involved.
But there's no background to it. Like you don't understand. I mean, yes, I understand the reverse raid was actually really great.
What I'm saying is that the screenplay has a lot of scenes that had to happen that don't necessarily have the stitching to make it work as well.
Because maybe they don't go into the background well enough. Maybe they're trying to present so many viewpoints that they never finish any of them, which is my, bigger point in this movie. That being said, that raid had a really, really good scene out of life where Captain America gets tired of chasing Bucky, so he just sort of like gets into the SUV and starts driving.
Oh, yeah. They make a reference in Winter Soldier too. I think that's an allusion to the 1990 Captain America movie where he just keeps on stealing cars from people. It's a really bad movie. It's J.D. Salinger's son plays Captain America in it. It's so weird. It's a movie where like basically Captain America is the sidekick to the President of the United States of America. Like who is the real hero? He's like the one who ultimately beats the Red Skull and all this other weird stuff. But he just keeps stealing cars. Like he's like, I'm starting to feel woozy, and then it's like runs and grabs someone's car and drives off. So they make an allusion in Winter Soldier where it's like, where did Captain America learn to steal a car? And this one's like, well, we need to solve the problem. Stealing a car. It's just a weird detail for him.
It was. I actually really enjoyed that scene. I also enjoyed, speaking of car scenes, where he has that, Captain America has a little moment with the who's the blonde chick?
Sharon Carter.
Okay. But it was a little bit of a cheesy scene. But I actually like the dynamic between Winter Soldier, Captain America,
and Falcon. Yeah.
Falcon.
Well, they have a wonderful relationship because in like the big theme for Winter Soldier was like friendship and brotherhood.
Yes.
And like Winter Soldier represents Captain America's like foundational one, his old school buddy, and Falcon is his new school buddy. And like their rapport with each other, it's like they're both threatening each other's turf.
Right.
And that's what I love about those two.
And
that dynamic and then the Peter Parker, Tony Stark dynamic are such great relationships.
They are good relationships. And I think that and I understand like, they're trying to make it into all encompassing. The way that I would have made this movie better would have made what I think of now, having seen it twice, is a good movie better is if instead of trying to bring in everybody, they just focused on those relationships. Like, you didn't need to bring in all these other people. You really didn't. Like, do you really need to bring in like, do you have to?
And here's me playing the studio advocate here. This was their chance to do that movie where you had the big superhero fight, because you have to have established a lot of superheroes before you can have a big superhero fight. And this was the first time they thought they could do it. Now, then the movie that was chosen to tell was a more character-driven piece. And maybe it should have been Avengers Civil War if they wanted to do this big fight, but they did Captain America Civil War. So it's about Captain America and his relationship with Bucky and his relationship with Iron Man. And that's the driving force of this movie.
But I don't think that in a movie which has so little time, you can have it both ways. You can't have a movie where you explore all these pretty complicated relationships when you think about it. Like, what you're talking about is relationships which go back multiple movies, potentially even drift into comic books with the diehard fans. And at the same time, you're trying to bring in all these characters to have a huge battle. I'm actually comfortable with either one of those. Like, you could explore the complicated relationships between Tony Stark and his parents, at the same time realizing Winter Soldier killed his parents and Captain America is protecting Winter Soldier since his friend. And he's kind of torn because Winter Soldier was just under orders, didn't really realize what he was doing. That's a movie. But you bring in that and a huge battle scene between every single Avenger and superhero, with the exception of a few like Thor and others. You start creating what I think of as a movie that could have been great into a movie that could be improved. I think you can have either,
But not both.
but not both. Not in the timeline you're talking about. Maybe in like a Lord of the Rings extended edition style, but
So this was a one-off movie. This could have been a little bit better as it was written without even really sacrificing all the things that they put into it. If they kind of up the power of action of the villain and also established one of the big players, which is the Black Panther, a little bit better. Now, you could have done a lot of like big superhero stuff and made it even bigger, or you could have pared it down a little bit more and really focused on your characters. But I think either way, it was a well-regarded movie. I think there's some really funny scenes in it. You walk out of it, you're like, those action scenes were good. There's good dialogue. It was a charming movie. Worst case scenario, it was a good movie, but not great. And you could definitely push it to be even better. And if you made some like even harder decisions, make it great. But one thing I will say that's really good is they didn't just do Civil War the comic, because that's not particularly good. And that relies on comics being around for 40 years and not just 8 years of Iron Man movies.
that's fair. And I think that I felt good walking out of it the first time. I felt good walking out of it, even better walking out of it the second time. And I think part of that is you walk into these movies with a certain expectation. Certainly they met that expectation. They plugged a lot more of their movies, power to them. We certainly can make this a little bit better. And I think if you had either focused on either more plot or more action, you would have had a better movie.
Yeah.
You can't have both at the same time, not with this many characters. And case in point, the only thing that I'm going to say is you come at it with a viewpoint of, I've read all the comics and I've intimately familiar with all the movies. I come at it with a viewpoint of, I'm familiar with most of the movies, I've read none of the comics. But somebody who's coming off who's only seen one or two movies and watches this.
I mean, to understand this movie, there's really 4 movies you need to have seen, which is Cap 1 and 2 and Avengers 1 and 2. Otherwise, they're not going to understand anything.
But I feel that if they had not tried to pack all this into one movie and made it into 2 movies, or focus on either all action or all plot, you could have actually had everybody happy. I really think so.
That's an interesting thing to ponder. But on that note, I think we've sort of talked about this movie to death. Tom, it was great having you on. Thanks again.
Absolutely.
All right, fans, thanks for tuning in. And next time we'll be talking about Highlander 2. And until then, stay scruffy, my nerf herders.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
How political is this podcast?
I have not addressed the fact that I'm a big old libtard, but publicly. But
I mean, Trump has made some statements. Maybe we could show him this movie. Maybe he could take some pointers from that.
Saw a great movie last night. Great ideas. It's going to be huge.
Hashtag, we're going to get all the information from the prisoners. All right.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
And we're back. So, Sam,
Yes.
where do you want to start on this one? Do you want to critique the episode, or do you want to give your opinions of Civil War and how you would have done anything?
Oh, I'm going to talk about the episode first, just because
Okay.
we're just coming fresh off of it. I thought this is a pretty decent episode. Like, even though this is not we're not living the format, right? Like, we haven't fully embraced like what is going to become another pass. I think that there were some really good points made and brought up, because this movie is one of those films where I think it's one of the cornerstones, right? Like of the whole MCU kind of thing. And I think that it is really fun, which is always a plus for a movie. But it definitely has flaws. And the two of you you just do such a good job kind of pointing out the little things that you're kind of like, why? What? Why doesn't time travel make sense? Why does spatial distance not make sense? Right? So I think sometimes when we go to see movies, sometimes when they're fun, we forgive the things that we just normally wouldn't if they're not fun. And this movie definitely has that. There's a lot of things that I enjoyed this movie when I saw it. I really enjoyed Spider-Man and Black Panther being added, and oh yay, new heroes. But good point is made. We did throw in a lot of new heroes, and for people who maybe not be familiar, I'm not Spider-Man because he's got a million movies right now. I mean, first time we're seeing Tom Holland, but Spider-Man's story is kind of in the zeitgeist of probably most people, even if you don't read comics.
Right. It's the same deal with the Hulk. The Avengers kind of felt fine not having to explain too much about him.
Right. There's been a few movies. It's there's only so many times you can watch Uncle Ben die before you know that, basically what Spider-Man's story is. But, I think that it's definitely, the MCU is always walking a fine line. I absolutely agreed on, so many points. But yeah, I thought the idea of moving, the whole, blow up to the UN in New York probably made more sense for where Spider-Man was. I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes more sense. Why are you going to fly a kid? How do you explain that to their guardian? There is a time difference between Germany and New York. How do you just explain that he's going off? And then how is Aunt May not more... why is she so chill, really, honestly? Why is she just so chill with this adult man coming into her nephew's life? Oh, he's rich. He makes weapons? He made weapons. I don't know why you're so chill about this, Aunt May. And, so there's a bunch of that. I think, for me, my biggest issue with Civil War in general, and then in case you were completely right when you were like, no, but it's Captain America's Civil War, because this is actually the Civil War inside of Captain America. My old friend, my new friend, who will I choose? But being torn apart. But I think that one of my my big things and my big gripes with the MCU is that like there is at a certain point as these movies go on, because we're so reliant on the movies before, as the series goes on, there is not as much attention paid to character development, especially because there's so many freaking characters. And I have like a couple of different problems with Civil War, and it's that and you guys said it beautifully, is that the fight has no real consequence. And I think that it has no bite really, because also they're already fighting in Avengers 2 Age of Ultron, like Tony and Cap. They're already like in an adversarial way. So I don't know. I feel like I never really got to feel them be close in all of the MCU. Like they're teammates, they're co-workers, but at best they're like real cool co-workers, I feel like. And the movie tries to do some heavy lifting in the very beginning to kind of be like, you know, we trust each other, we're a team, but like I don't know, like I know that they've been through stuff together, but I just never really felt that. And so like them fighting just felt like an extension of what they always do to me. If that makes sense. And
Yeah,
so like
well,
I
because
didn't
like for the sake of a movie, we see the arguments that they have, but we don't see like the chill downtime between
right.
movies.
Yeah.
Because it's movies and not comics, you know.
Right. And I think here's the thing. I just felt like I needed something even in the beginning of them just like chilling. Like don't get me wrong, all of the fight choreography, the scenes, the Russo brothers are very good at putting that together. Like their action scenes, you really can follow the action and what's happening, even when it's like fast moving. And I think that's really great. I just feel like there's so much in this film, and that can be to the detriment of the characters. And as we heard in the episode, right? Like there's like this, if you don't understand exactly all the motivations coming into it, it can be a little confusing for like just a layman who may have seen all the movies but doesn't really understand like the interpersonal like further expanded relationships. And so I wish that somewhere in there, you know, even after everything happens, in that first scene, and I do agree with you guys that the collateral damage of that event needs to be bigger for
Yeah,
sure.
it seems kind of small, right?
Right, yeah. It just like, especially because like compared to what we just saw in Age of Ultron, right? Like I know this is said in the episode, but it's true. Like it's like wait, this is the event, like not the lifting the city, like not the breaking of bridge, like not that. So I think that it needs to be like a little bit bigger, because it needs to be like this is the second time that a giant catastrophe has happened. Like this is clearly a dangerous person. This is like we really need to know who's out there, what they're doing. There's got to be someone overseeing, people. There's a lot of damage is being done. A lot of life is being lost in fighting these things. These problems from interstellar or intergalactic aliens or other dimensional, and other powered beings, that's not going to go away. But like, honestly, like we have to stop some of the property damage. Let's be honest. If there is one thing that the American government cares about, it is property damage. Maybe not people, but definitely property damage.
Their own property damage, yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So I think that it's very true. Other countries don't really care that much about their property damage. But I think that in the grand scheme of things, it should have been bigger. So the loss is bigger. And then I think that maybe if there was, I know that they wanted to do some like comforting of Scarlet Witch, and that's fine. And also what you guys said about her, not being quite as sad after her brother died, but being much more remorseful now. Maybe they could have thrown in a line, like just one line, like I killed my brother, no, I killed all these people, or like my brother died, and I just feel like maybe to add to the instability of it all, might have been nice for her to reference her brother. Was that not allowed? Because I know they didn't have rights to him anymore. So, they couldn't just mention him in the script.
They must have been able to mention Pietro. Like, they probably couldn't say, and Quicksilver, my brother.
Right. But Pietro probably, right? Right? Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
It's all like, sometimes when you're looking at these, you have to think about all the different hands in the pot, too. And all the weird usage of characters. But yeah, I just feel like I needed a little more just like pushback, or like just like some friendliness, or like a remember of it. I don't know. There's just not enough in the film itself to kind of give me this feeling that like this fight is of consequence, and then they forgive each other right away. So like, what is the actual fallout? And like, although the battle together is really cool, like it's just like, and now we're going here, so superheroes can fight each other. But like, it's just, I don't know. Listen, I loved it. I clapped and I cheered for every moment of it. But like, I was just like, this movie is fan service, which is great.
Yeah, it's nitpicking. I mean, like, let's be clear. Like, the movie is still a good movie. It's just there's a lot of like small details where you can kind of see the seams. Like, literally, this is like a scenario of doing another pass at a thing. One thing I remember about this episode is that it came out a fair amount of time later than the movie itself came out. And like phase 3 had progressed. I forget if we had actually gotten the trailer for Black Panther at that point. I feel like we hadn't yet, but it still felt like when this episode came out, it was like, oh, this is fairly dated, because it was still so fresh in our conversation about Civil War. Like, it was, we recorded this pretty soon after the movie first came out. Like, I think it was like right when we could watch it streaming is when we did this episode. And like, it's the movie that made me sort of think about like, oh, I should probably be wary of like recording too far ahead for some of these. Like, the show is kind of evergreen, but at the same time, like just the cultural references we make and the way we talk, and like this is even more so now. Like, you can't tell now because it's so far back that it just still feels like, oh yeah, this was 2016 or 2017, whenever it was.
Right.
Regardless, but like, but at the time it felt like, oh, this feels like it's 6 months old, which was one of those moments of like, oh, I shouldn't go too far in the recording process. Like, don't jump the gun too much on that, because then you can kind of feel it, at least in the, like, when it's fresh.
Yeah. I did like what you said in this episode, even though it's more than 6 months old, that you said that like this movie felt like it would feel more appropriate switched with Winter Soldier in terms of like where the characters were entrusting the government.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's like actually a really good point, because I mean, like, you could make an argument, and I'm sure people online have made the argument that like basically Cap's like adamant, I am not signing up for anything, is because he went through Winter Soldier. Like, I went through this thing, and like I don't trust like governments at all, because they're such large entities that they can be manipulated by like just a few dropples of plants of Hydra or other organizations. And so you could make the argument that like, oh, that's why he definitely cannot. They don't even really like kind of reference it. Like, I feel like I kind of wish that in one of the first like when Tony and he are talking, there was a little more of a conversation of them like kind of like, but like I think like if the language was a little better,
Like have them say like, are you fucking serious? Like we just saw Hydra take over the entire United States.
right, and just like also their points of view, like because if you can like, I feel like the thesis is not quite stated. Like, you know, Tony's like, we got to do it. The government wants us to do it, right?
Which doesn't make sense for this Tony.
Right. I think if he had been more like, listen, like, yeah, we're saving lives, but like, we need to have insurance and we need to have something backing us up because we're also causing collateral damage and these people are dying. And if there had been at least one scene of the two of them kind of stating their like thesis to each other, the way that Friends kind of do, I think this actually works for me for like the friendship thing. It would have been much better for Tony to be like, listen, like I yes, we have saved lives, but like because of things that Wanda did, look at how many people have passed. Like look at this tragedy. Like we need more than just you and I can provide in terms of leadership. Like we need real structure. We need and then you know can be like no because look at what just happened. Like do you know like can you actually trust these people? Like can you trust them? Because I thought I could trust in something before and I clearly could not. And I'm not going back to that. And I think like just having that one conversation would fix so much for me about this film. Even though this film is really about really Cap's one true love reuniting with him, and I get it, you know, it's really a romance between Bucky and him.
Yeah, no, it is really weird that they don't bring up Hydra like at all, and we talked about this in the episode. Like, that's a very strange thing that would connect a lot of dots. Like, just you can picture the conversations that both sides would have as a result of like of the Hydra incident, or just anything with like Tony. You know, like this Tony doesn't quite make sense as like a government stooge, which is why I liked my pitch of the Winter Soldier reveal as his parents' killer being earlier in the movie, so you feel like he's in it for vengeance as opposed to like loyalty to the government. Which again, this Tony does not have that in him. Like that's just not who the character was. What did you think about my my pitch for the Wakandans being more bellicose? You know, it seems hard to picture like a pre-Black Panther interpretation of Wakanda now, you know, like where they're a secret society kind of thing. But at the time we certainly hadn't seen the movie. I don't remember if the trailer had dropped. But the idea of like of Wakanda being actually kind of known to be just very isolationist but advanced and able to like push around America. I am actually still rather happy with, and I'm curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind that at all. I think that, I don't know if it would necessarily fully affect the Black Panther movie, like in such a way that it would structurally harm it. And like I say that because as someone who would want to like,
oh yeah, I mean the domino effect for we can't stress about like what would this do to the Black Panther movie. Like
right,
Ryan Coogler would figure out a cool thing with a slightly different setup. Like we can't stress about losing a movie because of like a butterfly effect. Like can't go there.
Yeah, I agree, but I do love that movie so much that I feel the need to say like I would absolutely want to protect it, and I don't think that it would damage it so much. I mean, I think it's like kind of an interesting concept because it would definitely make it like, technically he was already a priority. I don't know if it really changes everything that much because he's already a priority. Like honestly, this movie basically treats the UN much better than we treat the UN in real life. Um, and, and he was like Bucky's still a priority, you know? Like, I don't know if it really affects it that much because it's not that they treated Wakanda like some weak nation, you know?
Well, it's not about how they treat Wakanda, although there would be certainly like a degree of like it would be interesting to see the U.S. like bow down to Wakanda. You know, that would certainly be a fascinating kind of element there. But also to have T'Chaka and like the Wakandans in general be more shoving things around, like their particular stance on stuff, rather than being like quite as like peaceful and like we just want to have the Accords kind of like stance, and be more like we need to get these like if they were the scary Secretary Ross character instead, at least in the first part of the movie until T'Chaka dies.
I think that it is possibly dangerous territory. And I only say that because there is a stereotype of that is racist of Black people being aggressive.
Oh, like the African dictator kind of like
right. And so I feel like there's a reason why there is like a pullback there to like really show this country with restraint and respect and dignity. And so I do think that like there would have been possible, because it's hard to handle it well without going overboard with it, you know, like, and I think that maybe it depending on how it was played, it might play into some racist tropes.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And a thing that I didn't think about, so you know that's a very fair assessment, and I hope I was not presenting it from that standpoint.
No, I think like you were thinking of it as like have them be more of the driving force of the film, right? Like have them be like the people driving the action and the need, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I just think that like, you know, depending on how it's presented and depending on, and especially because Ross himself has this like undertone of untrustworthiness, right? Like that we wouldn't want to lend that to the Wakandans because of everything else that is kind of boiled into all of that stuff. But I don't think that's where you were going with it. I think you were just like, oh, we can like, there's too many people here. We could eliminate or streamline some of these roles too.
Well, no, I was thinking more. I was trying to play up like how interesting would it be for the tables to be turned where someone's like bossing the U.S. around.
Yeah.
Because that, you know, like is the thing that I'm going to be more critical of. So that's where I was kind of coming from with it. Also, I feel like it doesn't actually change T'Challa so much because he already is on the path of vengeance once T'Chaka dies. So just like having T'Chaka be less of a positive influence for T'Challa, I thought was interesting. But that's also its own like, you know, father-son dynamic kind of thing that you'd have to decide like how you want to play it.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally that would kind of think that would have to be a challenge for Ryan, because that would change some of the dynamics between the characters in his film.
Oh yeah, certainly. Like the movie wouldn't be about finding out that your father has flaws and then reconciling that with seeing them as a human being. The movie would have to be more about like seeing your father as flawed and then, you know, coming to understand, you know, XYZ thing about them, and like, but at the same time still like see them as being bad but also human. It would be you just have to take it from the opposite side basically.
Yeah. Can I just say though, I know that Cap and Peggy's niece do have a relationship in the comics, but I did think that it was very weird in this movie still.
Yeah, the chemistry's just not right.
It's not, And it's just like not the right time to like it's just not there. It's not there, and it was weird and it felt forced. And there were rumors even back when this movie came out that Marvel only did it to stop all of the shipping between Sam, Bucky, and Cap that was happening on Tumblr and AO3. And and that it was forced. But I think, like, in general, that aside, like the shippers and that kind of stuff, I just felt like it just felt weird. It just felt off. And that's like one thing that I really could have done without, not necessarily her helping or her being in the mix, because I think the scenes where she fought and all of that stuff, and there could have been a minor flirtationship continuing to go. But I just don't think this was the time, the movie, or the moment to take that relationship to the next level.
Yeah.
And the kiss was weird.
It's one of those ones where, again, this movie is expecting nerds like me to do a lot of work, which is like hyping up, like, oh man, like, you think Peggy's cool? Check out her niece, Sharon. Like, she's the one who's like the really cool, like, super spy lady character from the comics. Like, she's the one who has this long history with Cap and this, like, torrid love affair over the decades. So there's that. Then there's the fact that Haley Atwell just knocked it so hard out of the park in the first Captain America movie. Like, their chemistry was like so good, considering the fact that like it's also like a little underwritten. But it's like their chemistry so good that you end up with Avengers Endgame, like having them get back together. Spoilers for Endgame, a movie that is now many years old. From this perspective, but yeah, like the Peggy thing is such an example of like the ship being taken over by the larger fandom of the movies, in a way that, like, again, the comics, it was just like it's he had this thing with Peggy, but that was just a precursor to his true love, which is Sharon. And so, like, when they introduce her in Winter Soldier, you're like, oh, cool. But, she's a pretty small part. And you're like, great, they're setting her up for, like, a bigger thing in the next movie. And, like, then this movie feels like, it's like, all right, well, we gotta make this happen because too many people are still fucking talking about fucking Peggy. We gotta make the Sharon thing. Like, we have to make it clear. This is the relationship we're selling. And then immediately they're like, no, that felt wrong. No, we're backing up. Never mind. This is wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't help that they kiss and then, like, Sam and Bucky are in the car and they're like, ooh! Like, it's like a high school, and it's like, all right, adults. Like, and it's supposed to be like one of the lighthearted moments, but it just feels weird and awkward and wrong. And again, such a good chemistry between Haley and him that it was hard for the movie people with the MCU geeks without the comic geeks to kind of accept it. I just thought it was like oddly placed. Like, I knew about Sharon, but I was just like, it just feels off. Like, it feels forced.
Like, my argument here is that this is a thing that just did not adapt to where the fandom and where the chemistry of the actors were. Because it makes sense from a writing perspective, especially, it's the same writers for all three Captain America movies. So it makes sense from the perspective of this is the arc that we are setting up with the romance for them, and to have a basic, like, sketch out of, like, this is how we build up to Sharon, kind of thing for your arc for Captain America, even if the specific scenes aren't written out. But then by the time we actually get to this movie, everyone had settled on, like, no, but, like, the stuff with Peggy was, like, truly epic. And, like, they sold it even more in Avengers. Like, they cut, like, a love plot in Avengers from that Captain America was supposed to go through, because, like, the Peggy stuff just felt so good. And it's just not seeing that when you're getting to this movie and you're like, no, we actually have to, like, get to the Sharon stuff. Again, like, from me as a nerd at the time, I was like, cool, we're getting Sharon Carter. Awesome. Like we're getting there, and it's like in this movie we're finally gonna get her with some action scenes, and she's gonna have like a real romance with Cap, and she's gonna be a really cool super spy lady. And then you cut to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and they're like, fuck, we have no idea what to do with this character anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Poor Sharon Carter.
Yeah.
She did get a few good kicks in though. So.
Oh yeah, she did great in this movie because she was written to be she was written to be the female lead, like the cool lady super spy who can rival the Black Widow, like the person who combines like all the things we love about Peggy with all the things we love about Natasha, which was like a little bit of a flirted possible romance in Winter Soldier, even though it ultimately turns into more of a bromance between the two.
Yeah.
But, like when they both come out of the shower at Falcon's place, like there's some sexiness going on there. So it's like, okay, we get all the things that we like about Natasha, all the things we like about Peggy. So combine it all together, and then, hey, take that like cute blonde actress from Revenge, Emily Van Camp, and like put her in this movie because she looks like she'll be in like a really cool leading lady type that could be this take charge kind of spy lady. Cool. Put this all together, and it just didn't click.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. On paper it should all work really well. Even like me looking her up, I actually assumed she was younger than she is. So like from an age standpoint, she even that's like a pretty good match with Chris Evans. So she's 37 right now. She'll be 38 actually in like a couple of days from when we're recording this. And Chris Evans is what, like 41?
Yeah, I want to say he's like 41, 42. Around there.
He's 42. So like the age range is like, okay, that's like not a crazy kind of age gap, but like he feels so much older than her, and part of that's the Captain America man out of time kind of thing. But
right.
Yeah, like he just feels it just kind of felt like it felt a little wrong. Like it always was a little bit weird in the comics, but like the thing is in the comics it was always Sharon and then looking back in flashback to Peggy. As opposed to us being like front and center, like really liking this relationship with Peggy first and then going to Sharon next.
Yeah. I think it also doesn't help that like they talk at her funeral too, and then it's
mere scenes before this.
It just feels like he waited till the body was cold to then like make a move on her niece, and that's like not what's happening. Like Peggy's had a life, she's got married, she like all of these things, and like that's not what, but it feels that way because of the way that the movie's structured, and so it feels like, oh shit, we got to kill Peggy first so Cap can move on. And then kiss her hot niece that he's supposed to have a romance with. And I think maybe that's part of why it feels so weird and awkward. Because I remember thinking, like, damn, Peggy just died. Like I'm pretty sure I did think that in the movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that could be part of it. That could be part of it. And again, like I said, I would just kind of not do the kiss and let them still be flirty and still keep her in it and still keep her helping him, right? Mm-hmm. And like leave something there as kind of like an inkling for something more or the possibility of something more, and just kind of leave it as that and keep going with the rest of the film, because it just wasn't the time to put that kiss in.
Yeah, and the problem is like they basically slow played the relationship too much, and then they kind of had to force it because it was like, oh shit, it's the third movie, we're probably not getting a fourth. Like
yeah, for sure. They like rushed into that.
Yeah, maybe, which is so weird because it is again the same writers for all three. Because like maybe it's like kind of forgetting that like you didn't start with Winter Soldier, like that this is the middle chapter of the story.
Maybe they just thought they'd get a chance to like throw her into Endgame or something, and And then everything fizzled out, and like in a more serious way. And
Yeah. I mean, it's true. Like, who saw Peggy Carter being in Avengers Endgame, like, as a character? Like,
yeah,
in
no.
multiple parts. Like who anticipated that when they made the first Captain America movie? Like, no one pictured any of that. Like,
No.
it's it is honestly a testament to Haley Atwell's performance as Peggy Carter that, like, she was brought back for the Agent Carter TV show, that she kept coming back for flashbacks, she kept on being used just to remind us about all the stuff about Cap, because she had such a great chemistry and connection with him, and really owned that part, considering that it was honestly supposed to be sort of the sacrificial lamb, like a relationship that it wasn't literally fridging, because, like, she survives into to be a character in all 3 Captain America movies,
Right.
But to have her potential to be his romantic paramour was effectively fridged, because he was fridged, and so when he comes out of it, she's way too old, and she's to be his significant other. So it's just, like, kind of funny. Like, she was supposed to be like, oh well, now she's too old, and so we have to, like, look to the modern ladies who will challenge this man out of time. But all of us, like, look back and be like, no, but we like the one from before. That was the really good one.
And listen, she was so popular. She was in the Doctor Strange movie, the second one, with America Chavez. Right? Like, she was so positive, like, alternate, bring back Haley, bring her back.
Yeah.
We love her.
Yeah, a fascinating career turn for this character. Like, like, a lot of characters have blown up in the MCU, but very few have done so without the amount of material to, like, really, like, build this foundation. Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter, like, continues to be, like, a well-known character in the MCU, popping up all over the place, and there's no reason for it. It just happened to be a thing that we all kind of glommed onto.
Yeah.
And so, like, bravo. But yeah, so to that end, though, that Sharon Carter's that relationship died on the vine, because it was
for sure.
It was not to be.
Not in the MCU, at least.
Yeah, so let's see. Anything else that we want to, like, go over from the episode, though?
No, I think you guys did a good job talking about all the villainous plotting. All that was good. So I think that the episode was very succinct in finding a few flaws in the film.
Yeah, I think overall, like, the ideas were remarkably solid, and, like, it's a little nitpicky at times, but at the same token, like, that is kind of what the show is about in ways. And we weren't, like, shitting on the movie. We both were actually, like, coming at it fairly positively. Like, Tom liked it less than I did, but, like, still, like, came around to liking it. And so the nitpickiness was just like, oh, here's the things that would have, like, really, like, like I said, like, really polished it to, like, a fine, like a fine gem kind of level. But yeah, I was pretty happy with this episode, despite the fact that it felt like it was, like, kind of dated when it came out, and, like, the audio issues and all that. Like, I like the actual, like, content. I'm very good with.
Yeah, I think so. I think in general you hit all the good points. The criticism about that Tom had about bringing on extra superheroes and not explaining everything behind them, which I was like, I get that. And the ability to move around, and also the slight changes to our villains here, right? But again, I think it's hard to kind of transfer certain motivations from comic to film. So I thought it was fine for the most part.
So I'm glad that we looked at this episode again. It has been a while, and I frankly, because it's a movie that I overall like and, was successful, it's one that I haven't had as much of a reason to really, like, think about. So, this is one of the reasons why I'm glad that we do this sort of, bonus viewing of everything that we've worked on. So, on that note, what have we got up next? So the next Another Pass at Another Pass episode will be on Tron Legacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're ready
Gonna
for that one because you
strap in.
accidentally listened to that episode when instead of The Dark Knight Rises last time.
I did. I am totally ready. Yeah, I cannot wait. Tron Legacy. Oh, Tron. So special.
So on the main show, we just had Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Fun.
Next up on the main show after this will be season 4 of Reboot, where we are joined again by Red from Overly Sarcastic Productions.
Red!
Who is awesome.
Big fan.
And we spent as much time talking about Reboot season 3 as we do season 4. So those of you who know Reboot know why that is a good choice. I'm looking forward to having that episode drop. And yeah, we've got cool stuff in the works just in general. We've got a whole bunch of episodes already recorded that we're just waiting to get out the door, and yeah, I'm excited for what we've got coming up.
Me too.
So in the meantime, Sam, where can people find you and follow you?
Sometimes I remember our Discord exists and I check it. So there, and of course here, whenever we drop this, wherever you get podcasts. And if you have any complaints about anything I said or anything I forgot to say, you can reach Case at.
Well, of course, you can reach me on all the platforms that have the @ symbols at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm holding on to my AIM screen name for dear life, which is Quetzalcoatl5, because I was pretentiously into mythology and the Legion of Superheroes when I was in high school. Just to explain that one, because it's funnier when you explain it. Yeah, so you can also find me on the Discord. You can find a link to our Discord at certainpov.com or in the show notes for this episode. All over the place, we've got links for our Discord. You can also find this show wherever you get your podcasts, including now YouTube, where we have been posting all of our back episodes and all of these episodes up. So check out the Certain POV Media YouTube channel. It's grown a lot over the last couple of years and is like now finally starting to really have some momentum behind it. So that's pretty cool. Check that out. Unless you're listening to it there, in which case check here out. Here is great. Hi, we love you.
Here, find us here. Thank you.
That I think covers everything. So you should. In the meantime, pass it on.
Or stay scruffy, nerd orders.
Yes. Staying
I think we should bring it back.
It was living on in Scruffy Nerf Herders, the D&D Star Wars game that we were running, but that has taken its own hiatus because it's hard to do 3 podcasts simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. I believe you. I only do one.
Especially a let's play or a real play like D&D podcast. Like that editing was so much. I can't believe I used to do all of that.
Yeah. You're going to have to wait for Grace to get older.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, I can't even fathom that scenario. Ugh.
All right, Josue, let's go through our new Comic Day stack. We have a lot to review.
I know. Maybe we've gone too far.
Well, let's see. Marvel, of course. DC.
I got Image, Dark Horse,
Black Mask, Boom, IDW.
Aftershock, Vault, of course, Mad Cave,
Oni, Valiant, Scout.
Magma, Behemoth.
Wow, that's a lot. Well, all we need now is a name for our show. We need a name for our show about reviewing comic books every week. Something clever, but not too clever.
Like a pun? It's kind of cheesy.
Yeah, it's something that seems funny at first, but we might regret later on as an impulsive decision a few dozen episodes in.
Yeah, we'll think of something.
Join Keith and Josue for We Have Issues, a weekly show reviewing almost every new comic released each week. Available on Geek Elite Media and wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This is getting cut for time.
For sure.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.